our Welsh language service, please press 9. If not, please hold. We don't audio record calls to this helpline. For information about what we do with personal data, please visit our website at ico.org.uk/privacy-notice. Our helpline is for organisations, people who work for themselves, and for members of the public. Please note, we will treat all people with courtesy and respect, and we expect the same.
is something that's available to living people. And what I wanted to understand is what legislation kicks in when somebody dies, because obviously when somebody dies, their data still remains. And under normal circumstances, the living person can make a subject access request. But when a person is deceased, and how do you get the data?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, as you say, like data protection legislation just literally will not apply anymore. So unfortunately, once someone is deceased, information about them is no longer considered to be personal data, so it isn't accessible under our legislation. Depending on who holds it and what sort of information it is, there are some other legislations which cover access to medical records. Is it medical records that you were thinking about, or?
It was actually both. It was the medical records and social care records.
Oh, okay. So yeah, medical records. So after a person has died, we'll just have a look here at the guidance. So yeah, after a person has died, GP records are sent to the Primary Care Support England for storage. And to gain access to those GP records, the relevant party would need to make a request to the records manager in the relevant local area. The deceased person's GP should be able to advise on the process. So there's some guides. So that's under the Access to Health Records Act 1990. Unfortunately, it's not something we legislate, so we can't regulate. So we can't provide too much guidance about it. But you may be able to. I think it's a patient's personal representative who can access it underneath the Access to Health Records. So there's some guidance on the PCSE website, so pcse.england.nhs.uk, and if you just search accessing medical records, the deceased should come up. But that's unfortunately only just for medical records, that is, so Access to Health Records Act 1990. In terms of social services and other organisations, I'm not aware of any specific legislation that would, give you a right to access that information. You could, ask them under normal course of business. The other bit of legislation that we regulate is the Freedom of Information Act. And as you may be aware, public authorities are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So in theory, you can ask under Freedom of Information Act. But the problem is, if you ask under that legislation, if they release it to you under there, they have to release it to the world at large. So that they're quite unlikely to release anything confidential, about an individual under the Freedom of Information Act, because they're likely to owe due to confidentiality to the individual.
When you say, first of all, you've said that it's private data. So when a person's alive, you can understand that there's relevance, that's private data, and so therefore the Freedom of Information Act would not apply. Subject access requests would apply. But moving on to when somebody dies. Are you saying that what status when a person gets deceased, does the status of the data stop becoming private?
So in terms of our legislation, yes, it's not then protected essentially by our legislation. It's not,
No, but
people.
Sorry to interrupt. I understand. It's not the case that it's not protected. It's no longer covered. It's no longer under your jurisdiction, basically. So while somebody's alive, the data is under your jurisdiction. Once somebody dies, that data gets released from your jurisdiction. Okay. So therefore, you have nothing to do with it. You, as an organization, as a regulatory body, have nothing to do with that data anymore. But the data still exists. The data does not die, or does the data, just because a person dies, the data does not get deleted. So I'm just trying to ascertain what status that data holds, because if it's private, and like you said, if your argument is that as soon as the person dies, that data is no longer private and becomes public, then as you can appreciate, that you can make a Freedom of Information request, but then anybody can make that request, and it's a bit of a grey area. You see, I'm just trying to understand if there's only two legislations that you yourselves cover, and I don't believe when the person's alive, you have no jurisdiction over that data in the Freedom of Information arm of your organization, but you do have it under the Data Protection Act. But soon as the person dies, it does not then go into the, from one arm of your organization to the other arm, which is the Freedom of Information. My understanding is that once a person dies, it was never going to be in the Freedom of Information domain, and it was in the Data Protection domain. But soon as the person dies, it even comes out of that domain, so it's no longer regulated by yourself. I think that understanding is correct. But outside of yourselves, as a regulator, what as a relative, as a close relative, basically, my mum's recently died. I'm just trying to get her social care records. I just want to know what authority I can get them under. That's it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, short answer is I don't know the answer to that question because it's not, as I say, covered by our legislation. Whether you've got any rights. Ultimately, it'll be things like, because there's obviously the common law understanding of the duty of confidentiality, and I would think there'll be responsibilities that social services will have under that, i.e., they've got information about your mum, and they're not going to just release that to anybody because they still owe her, I think, under the common law, they'll still owe her some confidentiality. But whether they will think that you are, whether you would be deemed to be the appropriate person to release it to, I'm not entirely sure. I'm really sorry.
Okay, it's fine.
Something you need to ask them.
I rang up some advice. If you don't have the information, it's perfectly fine, and nobody's, there's no expectation on you to know this. So if you don't know, that's fine, perfect. You just mentioned duty of confidentiality. Can you confirm to me that the duty of confidentiality extends beyond life?
That's my understanding. The common, again, it's not something I'm able to comment too much about it, but my understanding is that this sort of common law understanding of duty of confidentiality, that would extend. That's my understanding, but again, I don't know that for definite. But that's my understanding that there is that element of it.
Okay, all right. So when you say confidentiality, that means like to hold the data, not release the data. That's what the term confidentiality means, to keep things confident. Even on a deceased person, to keep them confident. I understand that. When you are referring to the word common law basically, my understanding is that it's not something that I can say, look, well, refer me to a statutory legislation, because it's not in statutory legislation. So my understanding of common law is when somebody's actually brought a case to court and there's like a case law. Is that what you're trying to refer to when you say common law?
That's my understanding as well, yes. That was my understanding. But again, probably advise you to get some extra help, whether someone like Citizen Advice Bureau or some legal support might be able to say that yes, that would be my understanding of that as well.
Okay, that's fair enough. So all I just wanted to know is the fact that once my mother has died, her personal data, which still exists, does not come under your legislations that you regulate.
No, in terms of data protection, definitely not. Any information at all that a public authority holds falls under the Freedom of Information Act. So any information they hold, whether that's information about deceased individuals, living individuals, information about the bus stops, all of that falls under the Freedom of Information Act. But, i.e. you can ask for it under the Freedom of Information Act. But I think it's likely, very likely, that a public authority wouldn't disclose information about recently deceased people under the Freedom of Information Act, because they're going to owe them some responsibility not to disclose it.
Yeah, and so obviously, if I make a Freedom of Information request, the local authority just can't say no due to confidentiality. What actually the local authority must do is that they must then provide, refer me to legislation of an exemption within the freedom so they can't just say, well, confidentiality, use that keyword. They'll have to say, look, according to the information, freedom of information legislation, this section provides an exemption, and so blah 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 blah. Yeah, so they'll have to point out an exemption. Now, sorry.
So you finish, and then I'll say.
Oh, so what I was going to say, are you aware of any exemptions that would apply if I'm on a deceased person's freedom of information?
Yes, so actually that's what I was just going to talk to you about. So on our website, we've got a section about information about the deceased in terms of the Freedom of Information Act. It's a PDF document. It's a guidance that we give to public authorities. So it's very, very detailed, but you might want to just have a look at it. Let me just find the easiest way to get to it on our website. I think it's by searching, but I'll just be a moment.
Okay.
So on our website, when you get on the homepage, so www.ico.org.uk, you'll see there's a blue banner along the top, and then on the right-hand side of the blue banner, there's a search box. And if you type into the search box information about the deceased.
Okay, just hold on 1 second.
No problem.
Information about the deceased.
Yeah, exactly right. And the first search result will take you to a PDF to a document. It'll say document history and version control. And when you're there, it'll take you to as I say, a document, and it says information about the deceased and then Freedom of Information Act. And there it talks about if someone makes a request to a public authority for information about the deceased, it talks about what might apply, and it gives you some examples. So it might be worth having a look at that. As I say, I would give it a read. I think it's unlikely that they will release information about your mum underneath it, but it's worth reading that and obviously considering whether you want to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I will take a good read of that myself, some good bedtime reading. The other thing I just wanted to say, just a little bit of a further inquiry now. You've just said to me in this conversation that, or any information that a public authority holds is public information, all right? And therefore you can make a Freedom of Information request, yes?
Yeah.
So, and so let's just move away from deceased people, and let's talk about the living, and let's talk about all local authorities operate a birth, death, and marriages bureau. So they hold information regarding somebody's birth, when somebody gets married, and obviously when somebody gets deceased. And now that information. Can I understand that that's covered under the Freedom of Information Act?
Yeah, I mean, anything they hold will be covered by it. If it's accessible by another means, sometimes you can't get it under an FOI request. So, i.e., if there's already a process in place for getting hold of that information, then sometimes it won't be. They might redirect you to that other means of getting it. But yes, generally, if any request that's made, they have to consider releasing it or applying an exemption if they don't want to do it.
Okay, but this is maybe going off topic here, but do you know that the request for freedom of information does not have to be private? Mainly, I don't need to write a letter. I don't need to send an email. I can do it publicly to the what do they know website?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah.
What do they know? Yeah.
Yeah. So the question I wanted to ask is where does the freedom of information legislation conflict with business enterprise? And what I mean by that is that, if I, for example, if I was to go to my local authority and I was to request my birth certificate, there's a financial cost associated with that. So they would charge me some money. Now, if I go to my local authority register and ask for a death certificate, they equally charge me for that. So I just wanted to know, because obviously, if, for example, I go to the What Do They Know website and go to the local authority and I said, my freedom of information request is for full disclosure of any and all data relating to birth certificates or death certificates. They theoretically, under the Freedom of Information Act, because that's public domain information. For example, birth certificates, that's a public domain information because anybody can go down and request or give their details, fill in the application form, and get the birth certificate, and as long as you're willing to pay. But if I then go to the local through the website and say, look, I want all of them, all right, and therefore that way that compromises their economic activity. Are you understanding the point I'm trying to?
Yeah, I do. But there is an exemption for information that's accessible by another means. So I presume if you asked for information such as that and you can access it via a paid method, then I think they would just redirect you to that. So it's under part 2. I'm just trying to, I found it in the FOI, but I'm just trying to find the bit on our website where it's the guidance.
Just 1 second, miss. Before you give me that reference, you know, often the legislation says, look, if something's already made public, all right, and you're making a request for that, then obviously, you know, that's the alternative method. But under these circumstances, that's not the alternative method, because that alternative method has a cost associated with it. Because what can happen is that if we were to accept that line of argument, any local authority could just say, well, you know, we're going to commoditize all our public information. So rather than dealing with the information requests, we can just say, well, there's an alternative method where you can just pay for it. It's that aspect of commoditizing public information. So as I said, you know, the local authorities commoditize birth, death, and certificates because they make money out of that. Now, my understanding is that that's public information, and that the whole point of the Freedom of Information Act is that you don't have to pay for information. So there's two conflicting caveats or two conflicting areas here. Let's say I'm a local authority. I have commoditized the data which I hold, which is, you know, public information, namely birth, death, and marriage certificates, and I make money out of that. Now it comes to somebody makes a freedom of information request for all that information to be made public, and therefore that's going to hurt my bottom line.
Yeah.
So it's not a case of alternatives. It's a case of you know, an alternative would mean that rather than me providing, it's already go here, it's already in the public domain. But so therefore, that I understand that exemption. But this is not a reasonable alternative where I'm having to get that public information at a cost.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at the guidance that we provide about it, and it does talk about information accessible only on payment. So section 21(2)(a) states that information may be regarded as reasonably accessible to the applicant, even though it is accessible only on payment. And this is obviously from the legislation. I'm not saying I agree with it or don't agree with it, but it's obviously from the legislation.
Yep, I understand. Well, okay, so that it is that exemption that would apply. But so, for example, as you're aware, that there's, you know, like just another example is the land registry holds information regarding properties and what their retail value is. And there are other organizations that provide that information and commoditize that information, but that's still public information. So if I was to write to the land registry and say, look, I would like you to provide all this information that you hold about us. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that the legislation is meant to be for information that is public, and so you pay for it twice. I'm just struggling to understand with how the effectiveness of behind the principle of the freedom of information. Ideally, you know, the local authorities should not be charging because this is public information, but they charge an administration fee. That's only because everything's done on paper. But if somebody was to make a request for all of this information in one go, and would be willing to, the cost, like for example, I go to the local authority and I say I want all births, deaths, and marriage information. Well, they say there's an alternative way to do that, which is go and pay for it. But can you understand, if I was to pay for all that information, it could potentially turn out to be hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not £1 million. So that's not really, because I'm not asking, for example, if I go to my local authority and said, I want my birth certificate, or I want my marriage certificate through the freedom of information request, they can reasonably apply that exemption, saying, well, the single piece of information that you've requested, there is an alternative method where you can pay for it. And you can say, well, if £5-10, that's reasonable, or even £20 for the certificate, because it just covers the administration cost. But if I was to make the same freedom of information request, but not limited it just the information that I find important, that I'm looking for, but I want the whole data set. So if I was to say I want all births, deaths, and marriages, because that's all public information, and the local authority applying the exemption can say, well, we're not going to comply with that because there's an alternative method. Now, how is that an alternative method where I have to pay even £1 for each record, and there could be potentially, tens of thousands of records. That would mean I would practically be prevented from getting this information, which, as you've accepted, is public information.
Yeah, but you would be prevented anyway, because Freedom of Information Act has they don't have to, if it's going to be a disproportionate burden on them, there's cost limits anyway with the Freedom of Information Act anyway. Okay. So they can refuse something if it's going to cost, a disproportionate amount to give it to you anyway. So I think from that point of view, I understand sort of the point that you're making behind it, but ultimately it would be for the public authority to look at what the request was and obviously either apply an exemption or not apply it. And then if you weren't happy with obviously what they'd applied, then you could bring that to us. Do you want me to tell you where the bit on the website is about this section, about the section 21? And this exemption, yes. So you can have a look at it yourself. Yeah. So
is it section 21 of the Freedom of Information Act?
Yes.
Okay, I can look on the legislation myself. So it's section 21, yes? I can go to the legislation myself and read about it.
Yeah, so it's, yes, I would recommend, certainly do that, but I would recommend, because on our website we've got some guidance about it, that's all. Okay. So it's just information reasonably accessible to the applicant by other means, and it talks about restrictions on its use and that sort of thing. So it sounds like it might be suitable for, the questions that you're asking. So by all means look at the legislation itself, but there's also a PDF on the website. I think if you just search information reasonably accessible to the applicant by other means, that'll bring it up.
I think the key word there is reasonable, and I don't think if I was to request for all information that exemption would apply. But moving on away from that exemption, you've just mentioned another exemption, which is the cost associated with the Freedom of Information request. I believe if I was to go to the local authority and make that request for all birth, death, and marriage records, I don't believe that they could have a strong enough argument under section 21, because the word is reasonably alternative, and I don't think that's a reasonable alternative. However, a stronger argument for them to make is that it would frankly cost us too much. All right?
Yes.
I think that is a far more valid and stronger argument, because obviously there's going to be so many records. Now, my just counter query to that, and I do apologize if I've taken up more time than necessary, but I'm just have one last question regarding this singular point, is that who decides, like, for example, if when I go to, let's just say, for example, I go to Google and I say to them, look, I just want all my information. Now, as you can appreciate, my search history, my emails, that is an extensive amount of information. But because they have spent time, money, resources in automating everything, that is not a problem for them. So they cannot make that argument that, it's going to cost us too much, because if they had not invented or put forward systems that could easily extract that information, it would be manually labor intensive. Now, my argument is that maybe all this information is easily available. It's all maybe, for example, in a digital format. So the argument that it would take a lot of time is redundant. So my question is that when somebody says, it's going to take us a lot of time, all right, as an exemption, where is the objectivity in determining, well, actually, it's only going to take you a lot of time because you've not invested in systems that could easily extract that information. So, for example, I can give you an example that, how in CCTVs, the CCTV you can put up and it's recording people. And so it records people on a 24-hour basis, 7 days a week, for a month. I'm within my rights to make a reasonable request saying, look, anytime I've been recorded on your CCTV systems, I would like you to extract my information. The other person can say, well, actually, you know what? That's going to require somebody manually sitting down and going through all the CCTV recordings. Therefore, we're applying an exemption and we're not going to give you that information. And if that is the case, then basically that's like a hack in essence, because you should be able to create systems that can extract my information. I'm not bothered. But you have then, recorded me on your CCTV systems, and then you're saying that it's going to cost you too much money. You shouldn't have recorded me in the first place. Now, I'm aware, for example, when I've contacted you today, the ICO don't record these calls, and that obviously relieves yourself from a burden of my subject access request. If I was to make a subject access request to yourself, you haven't recorded this, so that's fair enough. But if you had recorded this and I requested this call recording, and you say, well, actually, you know what, somebody's gonna have to sit down and go through all the call recordings to pull that information out, therefore we're applying an exemption. My question is, when somebody uses this exemption that's going to take too much time, where is the arbitrary barometer that determines, well, actually, this is going to take too much time because of your failure to appropriately put the systems in place? Am I making sense?
No, you do. I understand what you're saying. I think from our point of view, though, I don't think our legislation the Freedom of Information Act requires, my understanding, for it to be held in a particular form. So I don't necessarily think that that's something we'd be able to challenge them about, to say, yes, it's going to take you 6 hours, but that's because you haven't, used a program that allows you to access it in 10 minutes. I'm not necessarily. I mean, I don't know whether we would look at whether we take that into account when something was refused. Obviously, we'd probably have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, but I'm not sure how much we'd be able to comment on that particular element of it, unless presumably it was very extreme, that it was penalising the individual.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately our legislation itself, or the Freedom of Information Act itself, wouldn't necessarily, I don't think, say, yes, you need to have this certain type of technology, or you need to have a certain standard being able to...
Yeah, sorry, that's fine. I mean, obviously, your legislation doesn't mandate that. What the legislation does say is that freedom of information, all information that an organization should be freely available. That is the principle, except where there's an exemption. All right. So the emphasis or the focus is on that. If it should be made available. So if you make a request and it is complied with, we don't have an issue. It is only when, obviously, as you can appreciate, when the legislation that's come in place saying the freedom of information, well, whose benefit is this information to? Members of the public, because when members of the public or civilians want to know this information, who is it to a detriment to? The organization who has to spend time, publishing it. So my point is that no doubt the legislation will not mandate somebody to do something, but the legislation clearly must have a criteria that when this is it a justifiable exemption, or can this exemption, this exemption about is going to cost us too much? What is the defining criteria? And therefore the regulator must say, well, we have our own set of defined criteria of what constitutes too much money, which would apply throughout the whole of all organizations. It must set because alternatively, as you can appreciate, if an organization, it's not in an organization's to make information available, but they're mandated to do through law, namely the Information Act, and then therefore the workaround solution could be, well, we can always just use this exemption when we don't want to deal with that information, and therefore more complaints can be raised, and therefore surely as yourselves as a regulator must have a definitive criteria. Well, actually is objectively identifiable that actually could have been, it doesn't require that much time, and it should be under the legislation rather than the exemption applied.
Yeah, I mean, we've got clear, obviously, guidelines about cost limits and associated with that. I think in terms of the balance between, whether they should have a different way of accessing it so it wouldn't take us lots of staff time, I think that's probably something we'd have to look on a case-by-case basis, look at an actual how they've handled a request.
Okay, I understand that. That's all of my inquiries today, because if I was to, I will actually make a freedom of information request to my local authority for all this information, and let's see what exemption they apply, because I think the first exemption regarding there's an alternative means, I don't think that's justifiable, but the second one stating the fact that it's going to take too much time, I think if that argument can be made where it was paper records, if you're going to a filing cabinet, it's going to take a lot of money, because everything's electronic now. You know, it's just normally it's just a press of a button.
Yeah, as you say, make the requests and see what they come back with, and then we can take it from there, can't we?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
All right then. Take care.
Goodbye.
And you. Thanks. Bye now.